Misma, pero también es una fuente de satisfacción para toda la vida. Ejerce asimismo una función capital para el desarrollo y el ejercicio de otras muchas capacidades humanas. Es, pues, un funcionamiento fértil, de suma importancia para abordar los problemas de las desventajas y desigualdad. Las personas que han recibido una educación, aunque solo sea básica, disfrutan de opciones mucho mejores de empleo, de participación política y de integración productiva con otras personas en la sociedad, tanto a nivel local como nacional e incluso global. Por ejemplo, las mujeres que saben leer y escribir son capaces de comunicarse en el terreno político con otras mujeres que se enfrentan a problemas similares a los suyos y dejan así de estar aisladas. Y esas ventajas conducen a otras, como la educación es una fuente de opciones laborales y de poder político, mejora la posición negociadora de una mujer en el hogar, lo que le permite, por ejemplo, plantar cara a las amenazas y a la violencia, o irse si no logra que se produzcan los cambios necesarios. Como la educación modifica la dinámica de poder en el hogar, también abre oportunidades para una distribución más equitativa de las labores domésticas y con ello hace posible que las mujeres tengan tiempo para el ocio. Otras intervenciones que potencian las capacidades de las mujeres, como por ejemplo el acceso al crédito y la protección de sus derechos de propiedad, son similarmente fértiles. Pero la educación parece tener un lugar especialmente destacado en las iniciativas que muchas naciones especialmente han emprendido para promover la igualdad humana a lo largo de los 2 últimos siglos. Creo que esta cita puede servir como un epígrafe algo desarrollado y extenso de la importancia que tiene el tema de las políticas sociales y en particular la reducción de la pobreza en nuestro país. No quiero extenderme más porque le estoy robando el micro a Gustavo, que va a hablar específicamente sobre la contribución intelectual del profesor Banerjee. Muchas gracias. Bienvenidos.
Bueno, vamos a tener entonces al profesor Banerjee que nos va a dar una conferencia magistral sobre, como dice el título ahí, si el entrepreneurship among the poor is a way to growth. El profesor Abhijit Banerjee was educated at the University of Calcutta, Nehru University, and Harvard University, where he received his PhD in 1988. He is currently the Ford Foundation International Professor of Economics at MIT. In 2003, he founded the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, JPAL, along with Esther Duflo and Sendal Mulainethan. I have him in Las Celas here, but I couldn't spell right his name. And remains one of the directors of the lab. Banerjee is past president of the Bureau for Research in the Economic Analysis of Development, a research associate at MBER, CIPER Research Fellow, International Research Fellow of the Kiel Institute, a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the Econometric Society, and has been a Guggenheim Fellow and Alfred Sloan Fellow. JPAL received the inaugural BBVA Frontiers of Knowledge Award for World-Class Research, and Professor Banerjee received the Infosys Prize 2009 in Social Sciences and Economics. In 2011, he was named one of the Foreign Policy Magazine's top 100 global thinkers. His areas of research are development economics and economic theory. He is the author of a large number of articles and 3 books, including Poor Economics, Repensar la Pobreza, que está a venta aquí en nuestro local de la universidad y que además puede ser autografiado por el profesor después de la conferencia. And this book won the Goldman Sachs Business Book of the Year. He's the editor of a 4th forthcoming book, and he finishes, but not least, his first documentary film, The Name of Disease, in 2006. So it's really quite an honor to have Professor Banerjee with us. We thank you very much for coming and sharing your knowledge. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Let me start by kind of maybe trying to suggest why this is a question at all. And the reason why it's a question is that there's so many, I think, really wonderful stories of remarkable things that poor people do to make their life better. In this book that Gustavo just mentioned, we have a story. For those of you who haven't read the book, I'll repeat the story. It's a good enough story that it's worth retelling. The story is in the kind of right next to the Bombay Stock Exchange, there used to be every morning there would be 4 women who would be sitting on the sidewalks and apparently doing nothing, except for every 20 minutes they would get up, run to the middle of the street, which is a very busy street, is in front of the stock exchange, pick up something and go back and sit on the other side. And they would keep doing that over 4 or 5 or 6 hours during the day, and then at some point they would leave. And it took a while, I think, to figure out what were they doing? Why would they do that every day? And what's the point? Turns out that Bombay is on the sea, like Lima, and it has lots of wet sand. Now, wet sand is not very useful, but dry sand is, because you can use sand to clean your utensils. After you cooked, you can use dry sand to scrub your utensils. So sand is useful, you can sell it. However, how do you turn wet sand into dry sand? Because the sea comes in, the sand gets wet. So what you do is you lay it on the street. And when you lay it on the street, the cars go over it, and the wheels of the cars dry the sand. And when they dry the sand, you get, after 3 or 4 hours, you have dry sand. So what they were doing, they were scooping up the dry sand, and eventually they would take that dry sand home and sell it in their neighborhoods. So this was their business model. It's a clearly brilliant business model. In some sense, it's sort of feeding off the wheels of commerce, so to speak. And yet, and there are many stories like this. And that's sort of why people, I think there is a temptation to think about the idea that somehow maybe we aren't simply creating the right environment, and within the right environment, poor people would just have so many creative ideas, and they do so many wonderful things that the problem of poverty would go away on its own. So in some sense, it's been a very seductive idea. It's supported or not supported. In some sense, it's tempting to think of in this way, because you look at the poor, the fraction of self-employed among the poor. So one way to define an entrepreneur is someone who is self-employed, who's not paid a salary, who bears all the risk for their whatever livelihood they pursue. If you take that fraction is much higher than the corresponding number of people who self-describe to be self-employed in the OECD. In OECD, that number is something like 12%. 12% of the population say, I'm self-employed. The number, I'll show you different numbers as we go, but it's clearly there's just a lot more people. So this is one way to ask the question. This is families that have at least one person self-employed in agriculture. So this is self-described self-employed. And so these are basically peasants, but they are bearing risk. Peasants do exactly what an entrepreneur is supposed to do. They put in capital, they hire labor, they hire other inputs, they get some returns, and the fraction of those people, what's on the horizontal axis is the fraction of those people. And you can see in many countries, for example Peru, that number in rural areas, among the rural population, that number in this data, which may be a little dated, is about 68% or something like that. So that's a number that, so these are people, this is not to say all these people are only peasants, I should emphasize that. These people often, this is question, how many households have at least one person self-employed in agriculture? This is why this number is not zero in urban households as well, because they might be working in the urban areas, but they might have one family member who's still in the village and working. So this number is a very high number. So that's, now if you discount agriculture, it's still impressive. You take the again, the number from Peru. 23% or something like that of households in rural Peru have one person self-employed in non-agricultural work. So this is someone who's not doing a job, he's self-employed, he's outside agriculture, he lives in a rural area. So that's a very striking fact actually that we hadn't maybe taken as seriously as we should have, because it's in fact very clear that even in rural areas, a lot of the self-employment is not in agriculture, and certainly much more so in urban areas. So there's an enormous amount of self-employment among the poor. Another way to ask this question, so these are, I should say, these are rural households. These are not every household. These are households who are under $1 a day. $1 a day being in the 1993 PPP. So this is the classification. So this is a specific group, poorest people. If you look at how many of them have at least one non-agricultural business, again the number's pretty high. So many countries, 30–40% have at least one non-agricultural business, and that's true in rural areas as well. So you can take very different cuts at it, but the main point being that if you think of 12% as the fraction of self-employed in the OECD, these numbers are just substantially higher. These people, most poor people, people who live under $1 a day, rural or urban, are much more likely to be self-employed in the, I think, the natural sense of being an entrepreneur than the average OECD person. So that's sort of why I think this conversation has a natural, there's a natural, at least temptation to say, poor are entrepreneurial, let's help them be better entrepreneurs. Now why is this surprising? Why would this even require, I mean, people do different things. So the reason is that we might have thought the opposite. We might have expected the opposite. We might have thought, look, you know, poor people, many of them, I mean, we know from all kinds of other evidence that their access to credit is very limited, that they don't typically, they can't borrow for one, and or if they can borrow at very high interest rates, and very high means very, very high, often above 100% a year. So we're talking about serious cost of capital. And you might think that when you're poor, your ability to absorb risk is much more limited because you are poor. And so if you actually lose money, you end up in a situation where you don't have enough food, or you don't have enough medicine for your family, or all kinds of things. Add to that the fact that most poor people have not had the advantage of some sophisticated education, so their skill sets tend to be relatively limited, things that you can learn without having, you know, an MBA or a engineering degree or some specialized degree. So these are, their skill sets are kind of perforce limited. And they're probably not from families which have the best connection. So, you know, if you put those things together, it seems surprising in a sense that you would see them being the entrepreneurs. So why would you, you know, you have all the disadvantages. From the point of view of starting a business, you seem to have all the disadvantages. Why are you in this world? Why are you running a business? So that's sort of the question. So one answer to that is a phrase that Muhammad Yunus, who founded Grameen Bank, came up with, which is this phrase, the poor are natural entrepreneurs. And I've heard him say this phrase many times. He seems to actually somehow believe it. So there's something, is I think suggesting that there's something kind of in the nature of being poor that makes people entrepreneurial, that they have found they are good at looking for opportunities because they have been in a setting where they need to do so. Some idea of that kind which suggests that being entrepreneurship is something that's sort of maybe innate in all of us, but much more realized among the poor. So that idea, I think, is so one of the things I want to do is first, I mean, take us through some facts that we know about the businesses of the poor. So these are just descriptive facts. And then I'll start telling you a little bit about maybe what happens about the effects of interventions. But the most important, I think, and most obvious things I think I'll talk about will actually be about things that you could just look at in descriptive data. So, you know, just things that you see. So the things I'll talk about are like, what are these businesses like? How durable are they? What are they looking to do with? Take them. Look. So the first and perhaps the most durable fact about the business of the poor, this is from an 18-country data set that we put together where we used there's some things called the Living Standard Measurement Surveys, which are surveys that most countries, the World Bank does, some countries, other organizations do, which are very kind of the same survey, and they ask a bunch of questions about what you consume, so try to identify who's poor, a bunch of questions about assets, and a bunch of questions about what your sources of livelihood are. You know, what do you do for a living? So that's sort of these surveys, then they exist. So these are all from the same kind of survey, essentially almost identical surveys done in many countries. And the fact that is very striking is that if you look at the median business run by somebody who lives under $1 a day, it has the total number of employees is less than 2, probably less than 1.5. I'm eyeballing, but something like that. So the average firm has something like 1.5 people working in it. Now, of those people, how many are paid? That's the sort of, and in many countries that number is now close to 0. So you look at Ghana, Indonesia, Ivory Coast, Nicaragua, Pakistan, that number is close to 0. Now this huge number you see in, I think in Ecuador, that's 0.6. So less than 1 paid employee. So first fact about these businesses is that they have no employees. And that's a sort of a, very, very stable fact about this. You can look at in many, many countries, you'll find the same thing, which is they have no employees. Okay, so they're really self-employed, but also self-employing. Second fact, what other assets do they have? Most of these businesses have no vehicles. Vehicles include wheelbarrows, cycles, push carts, anything you include, and the answer is essentially 0. With one exception, which is Pakistan, where everybody owns a bicycle, turns out. Well, I can't explain this fact, but it's true. How do many do the... So the surveys vary a bit, which is why you don't see numbers from every country. So some of these very specific questions don't get asked in all the countries. How many countries own a machine? Some machine. And machine here includes a balance. That's a machine. Like a mechanical balance for weighing fruit, that's a machine. So is if you have a burner for making tacos, that's a machine. So you know, we're not talking about iron smelter. We're talking about something that all machines included. That's a number that's less than half have any machine. So this is just to calibrate that these businesses are small, and they're small. They don't have many assets. Another fact, which is doesn't seem obvious, but related, but is very, very striking, is that most people are not just running that business. In fact, many people run 3 businesses. So this is the number of people who have two businesses. So they have they're not doing whatever their business was. They're not doing it full time. Okay, so and that number in some countries is very, very high. Some countries less so, but mostly the number is very high. 75% of people in Ghana, or 90% of people in Ghana have 2 businesses. So one of the, and that's sort of, I'll come back to that, because that's related to this question of, you know, how much effort are you putting into the business? Are you doing it so I'm going to change my life? This is my great idea. I'm going to push as far as I can into it. Or are you doing it somewhat like, you know, this is one thing I do 5 other things, and I'll try to, you know, I try to put together a livelihood. Those are different views of the world, because if you think of somebody as a, you know, if you think of somebody as an entrepreneur with a passion in doing something, you might think they want to do a lot of it. And what the fact I'm trying to show you is that people do many things. So here's another way to look at the effort. So we were looking at businesses. This is from India. We were just calculating how much, and this is an example. So I don't want to make too much of it. Okay, so it's one place where we very carefully calculated the capital stock. It's not a trivial thing to do, to value the capital stock, because it's a fair amount of work. Because capital is like, you know, what is the value of a weighing balance that's 12 years old? You know, valuation is lots of work. So I don't want you to take this number too seriously, but it's a number that's still striking, which is that their capital stock in these people owned a shop. We valued their entire capital stock, including plastic bottles which contain biscuits and everything else. You took that whole thing and you see how much would they need to cut back their consumption. We also gave them a household module, so we knew how much their consumption was. How much would they need to cut back the consumption to double their capital stock? The answer is 2.5%. So if they had spent, 2.5% is the order of magnitude of what they spend on snacks. In fact, less than that. The amount you spend on snacks in a year for most of these households are of the order of 5 to 7%. So these are like fried snacks, biscuits, things like that, candies for the children. So this is less than that. You could double your capital stock. So if you really wanted to increase your business, I understand that there is all kinds of, financial constraints here. But if you really want to, one thing you could do is, instead of buying that taco, or you could go and buy some more biscuits and put it in your half-empty jar, which has not that many biscuits in it. So somehow you could, or buy soap, which you have run out of to sell. So there is a level at which these businesses are really don't look like they are hitting an immediate constraint. Let me say, not that they are not hitting a constraint. I'll talk about what constraint I believe they are hitting, but I don't think that the right way to think about these businesses is that they couldn't do a little bit more if they wanted to. Another fact is that they go in and out of business. So this is from a survey from Mexico. It's slightly different survey because this is a panel. These are people who were in the survey twice. So you had to look at them twice. And so this was looking at people who were 3 years apart surveyed, and we were asking them, how many do you have of you have a business? So 15%, I think in both years, said they had a business. 6% of the people who had business in 2002 were in business in 2005. Another 12% no doubt replaced them. I'm not saying that this is a fixed population, and 1.8% of them retained their original workforce. So this turnover is another fact. People change businesses a lot. They move. This number looks to me high based on other things I've seen. This number looks high to me, even but that might be, Mexico might be somewhat different from other countries, but these numbers are striking, how much exit there is. So, so this is all of this is sort of to set the stage for, I think, what I'll want to talk about next, which is what happens. I mean, one of the obvious things these people face is a credit constraint. They are clearly credit constrained. If they wanted to borrow $50,000 to buy a machine that does something, set up a factory to make garments, they couldn't do it. Nobody would give them $50,000. Basically, none of these people. To first approximation, none of them could get $50,000 to start a business. So that's, I think, so are they credit constrained? Almost surely. Are they? So then the question is, but if you give them some amount of credit, what do you do with it? What's the effect of that on the livelihood? So while they're credit constrained, nobody's offering them $50,000. On the other, microcredit offers them a certain amount of money. What do they do when that happens? So this is from an evaluation of one program, but I'll talk about other programs in a bit. One program is a traditional microcredit program. It has, the group liability. It's a program in India. It's run by what was then the largest microfinance organization in India when we started. It had group liability, meaning that they were formally, or at least on paper, there were groups, and groups were expected to pay for each other. So if needed, so they were supposed to be jointly liable for the loan. The loans were about $250. They had weekly repayment, and the interest rate was 24%. So not super high. It is very, very median organization by South Asian standard. This is what almost all organizations look like, give or take a couple of percent and a couple of thousand rupees, but really very, very similar to many other organizations. The way it was done was that different neighborhoods, 52 neighborhoods were chosen to get microcredit. They would be offered microcredit. Another 52 neighborhoods they were not offered. There was a randomized control trial. These neighborhoods were chosen at random. And while I won't show you, the neighborhoods were absolutely, the randomization worked very well. The neighborhoods and everything we could see, the neighborhoods were very similar. This is people waiting to, I think, repay their loans. So again, this is just to reinforce, these people look like many of the people I was telling you about. 31% have one small business. 9% have two small or more small businesses. So it's exactly what I was saying before. They look very much like that picture. On the other hand, none of the businesses really required any specialized skills. There were general stores, fruit and vegetable vendors. Tailors were the only ones who had some skills. 10% have any employees. The max is 3. So that's all. 20% have no assets whatsoever. So this is all what I just said, that general picture that you get from the whole world, this is a prototype of that. The businesses generate $75 a month in profits. So that's about the profit from the business. The scale is about $325 per month. That was the revenue. So these are very small businesses, as you can see. Now they were pretty candid. Now Spandana is somewhat special among the microfinance organizations in India, is that they're upfront about saying, you don't have to lie to us to get a loan. They're very upfront about this. So they ask you, and now even then people may or may not always tell the truth, but clearly something like 50% of the loans had nothing to do with businesses, even on paper. And maybe there is some worry that if you said that you're going to use it to repay another loan, you may not get one, because people might think that how would you pay it back? But even with that, 50% said, this is self-declared, that they will do something for a business. Now, interesting fact that comes across from many such studies is that most of the people offered a loan didn't want one. Okay. The take-up, so let me explain the two figures. The one on the left is people who were in the neighborhoods where Spandana was supposed to offer, and the blue are the neighborhoods where they're not supposed to offer. Now even if you're not supposed to offer, if somebody shows up and says, I live over there across the street, would you give me a loan? Some loan officers will give them a loan. So we didn't have perfect control over it. So our unit of randomization, we should still stick to it. So we treat the people we think of the people who were in what we had selected to be the neighborhoods where they should get loans, to be people who were treated, and the people who were in the neighborhoods where they were not supposed to get the loan, we treat them as non-treated. That does not mean that they didn't get the loan. That means that they were not supposed to get it, and our comparison, since these were randomly chosen groups, is the valid comparisons between intended to treat, people who intended to treat, people who intended to get the loan, and people who were not intended to get the loan. That's the comparison we're going to do. Then we can scale it potentially by the extent of the difference. The main point being 18% of the people who had the option of getting the loan took the loan. In treatment, 5.3 in control. Now, other MFIs could enter, and they did enter the control areas more. So you get the fact that in the end, 27% took a loan from Spandana, and 18.6% in the neighborhoods where we intended to take the loan, and 18% where we didn't intend them. That's enough of a difference that you can still see statistically significant results, because we surveyed a lot of people. So there was still a 9% difference between these two neighborhoods, and or 8%, and that's enough to see differences. So we can still compare and see what the difference is, and then we can scale it by the fact that the difference was small. Important fact that you want to take away from this is that 27% took a loan when it was offered to them, not 100%. And these were among households who are eligible to get a loan. So it's not that every household was eligible to get a loan. Spandana has rules which say that, you know, only households which have a woman between the age of 18 and 60 can get a loan. So these were households which had a woman who had lived in that neighborhood for 3 years, not every neighborhood. So they were not people who had just come in for the day. They had lived in the neighborhood already for 3 years. They had a house, an address in the neighborhood. So these were well-established households with a woman in the age range were supposed to get a loan. And among those households, about a quarter want loans. That's a sort of a striking fact to keep in mind. Many studies find the same thing. Indeed, the reason we had a big problem with this study is because when we went to the microfinance organization, they told us 80% will want a loan. So we collected data in the baseline for a small number of people because we thought everybody is going to want a loan. Turned out from the baseline, the first thing we learned is our baseline was too small because, in fact, very few people want a loan. And that's a fact that I think many people have now learned, that basically people don't want loans. That's, you know, microfinance loans and any other loans, they just don't want them. That's sort of a, now that's keep that in mind because we were telling a story on why they don't start businesses or expand their business. Now, there was a significant, absolutely statistically significant effect on the number of business startups. So it went up from 5.3% to 7%. Now, is that small? Is that big? Well, my sense is that that's pretty big. I mean, it's not tiny. It's an increase of about 30% in the number of businesses set up. And remember, only the differences in the take-up of the loan was only 8%. So this is not a small effect. On the other hand, it's 7%. It's not 85% are not people not setting up businesses. Now, some of them have businesses, but a lot of those people who don't are not setting up businesses. They are staying put. What are they doing with their loans? They're buying business durables, that's in rupees per head per month. So that's still, you know, in dollars, how much is that? That's a household size of about 4, so that's about slightly over $1 per month in business durables. So over a year, they invested something like $13 in business durables. This is the average household. As against $5.3, statistically very significant. So big, more than double. But the numbers are tiny. And it's not because this was they didn't spend on other things. They were buying durables. The durable expenditure went up from $116 to $138. What were they buying? They were buying televisions. They were buying pressure cookers. They were buying safes. They were buying bicycles. They were buying all kinds of things, but not business durables. You know, this is, and we try to take the most liberal possible definition of business durables. If you have a storage chest, that's a business durable. But it's, even with that, they're not buying business durables. That just wasn't there. I mean, you know, you can see the difference. It's significant, but it's small. You can see much bigger differences in other things, in particular. The thing that didn't happen is there was no effect on per capita expenditure. So people did not get richer. This is true after 18 months, but it's also exactly the same magnitude is true after 3 years. We go back and look at the 3 years. I'm telling you the numbers at 18 months because they have nice bigger pictures of them, but it's the same fact is true. So every one of these facts is true, almost mutatis mutandis after 3 years. Nothing changes. You know, they really don't start businesses. When they start businesses, they add a little bit of capital to or even the existing, a little bit of capital, they buy lots of durables. That's the big difference you see is they buy lots of durables. They're not, other interesting fact I'll tell, and I want to emphasize this, we are going to come back to the question of savings at the end, is that they seem to, you see this the bottom right box is what we call temptation goods. What are temptation goods? Temptation goods are things we ask them in the baseline. Are there things you want to give up? Things you rather not spend money on? And the answer is yes. Of course, there are lots of things. And in this particular context, that includes tea, coffee, fried things, cigarettes, alcohol, I don't remember, maybe sweets. These were this list of things. We calculate what happens to them. Expenditure on those things goes down. Expenditure on durables goes up. Expenditure on those things goes down, significantly down. So people, and notice that difference is bigger than the difference on the effect on business durables. The business durables is as much as half the size of this effect. So on, cigarettes and tea, there's a bigger effect on these things. In the opposite direction, the magnitudes are just small. That's the first fact to keep in mind, is that just the business effects are not where you... Now, other things changed. These things didn't change. Education, health, women's empowerment. Women were pretty empowered in this one, so they started high, so maybe it wasn't. But we don't see much effects on all these things. Okay, so what I want to do is now kind of, how much longer should I speak? Another 5 minutes? 10. Okay. I probably don't have 10 minutes of things to say, but I'll. So this, now there are a bunch of other studies. Dean has several, but other people, and in many countries, in Philippines, in Mongolia, in Bosnia, in where else have I seen a study from? Maybe the very comparable studies are from these countries. Morocco. Some are rural, some are urban. You see absolutely the same results. What's very striking is how stable the results are. Basically, no effect on per capita consumption, some effect on some durables. Sometimes the durable varies. So in some cases, it's house repair. It's not buying a television, it's repairing your house. Some cases, it's buying a cow. It looks like a cow could be a business, but mostly it looks like the cow turns into consumption rather than. So it's a way to, it's a durable that provides consumption goods. And that's the pattern you see in every country. Is that, basically people buy things which make their life better. And it's not that. Also, very strikingly, something we didn't expect is this fact comes back. The temptation goods, several countries you find reductions in smoking, reductions in drinking. So you find this exact pattern of going for buying durables, buying less, spending less on these other things, and almost no effect on daily consumption. So that's sort of a very stable pattern we seem to find. So this is now, I think there are enough studies that we kind of know what the pattern will be in the we will at least be able to confidently predict what will come out in most other studies, is that you won't see big effects on per capita consumption. People are not getting richer. Now that's not a surprise in my view. Let me start by now try to tell a story of, I think, what's happening. So what are the two facts? One is that people run businesses. The second thing is that they don't seem to be taking them anywhere. They seem to be staying in the same place. The businesses don't become bigger businesses. They remain more or less the same size of businesses. Now, let me now match that with one other fact. So this is from a survey we've done in actually a couple of countries. I want to get more into that at some point. But we asked them, parents, this is from India, we asked parents a question, parents or grandparents. Suppose you had you have a, so depending on their age, we ask them, you have a son who's 5, or you have a grandson who's 5. What do you expect them to, for their, what do you want them to have as a livelihood when they're grown up? Okay, so, and we, to make that question more interesting, we gave a special case where I said, imagine in a lottery you won $1,000. So you had some money to help them. We didn't suggest it, but we said you have some money, so you could choose, you could send them to school, you could train them. So it was not just a matter of saying, well, he has to do what I do because there's no other option. So we tried to emphasize there are options. The answer is, 75% say they want some government job, 18% say they want a private job, some other sundry answers, 0% say they want to be an entrepreneur. It's really the more precise answer you can get. And this is striking because it's, we're telling a story about entrepreneurship, but I think part of this story is people don't want to be entrepreneurs. They would prefer to have a government job. A government job is very stable, they get paid, it's maybe unexciting, but it's something where you don't worry about your life. And I think that's somehow showing up. Now, so part of the answer is, why don't people grow their businesses? Well, part of the reason is that I think they're not that excited about business. Now, on the other hand, it's what all the evidence suggests, that it's quite profitable to expand the business. Now, let me make 2 points. One is that the business itself typically is run at a scale where it looks like it's losing money. The reason why that's the case, so if you, in this study we talked about, this randomized control trial, if you price labor at minimum wages, most businesses lost money. Now, that's a bit unfair, because you shouldn't price them at minimum wages, because part of the point of these businesses, I'll say in a minute, is that they offer flexibility. So a woman can stay at home, take care of the children, and run a shop. Or so full-time, you should not assign her number of hours. I mean, she's not paying full attention during those hours. She's saying that her shop is open from 9 to 5, but she's probably working in the shop for 2 hours at most. So it's difficult to do this exercise, but it looks like part of the reason these businesses seem to be at a scale where as soon as you put in one person's labor full-time, they have to lose money. So basically they seem to be very much under scale. And that's consistent with other evidence which suggests that, for example, they're willing to pay, they're currently paying high interest rates, which suggests that, scaling, if selling the capital was better than paying the interest rate, they should sell this capital, so they're probably getting reasonably high returns. There's now a bunch of studies which basically give people a gift of money and look at what happens to their business returns. And the answers they get, not a loan, just a gift. And when you look at these studies, they find that those businesses that get money, these are studies where you give the money to a business owner, not to a random person. So these are already people who have businesses. When you look at those people, it is true that their incomes goes up by a substantial proportion. So 60% returns are quite common. So in some sense, these businesses can be expanded profitably. It's not the case that it's impossible to expand them profitably. You could expand them with a little bit of effort. The expansion could be profitable. Not necessarily by borrowing at 80%, but if you cut back on your consumption of fried things or tea, you could expand your businesses in a reasonably profitable way. So so 2 facts: people don't want to do a business, and the businesses are not unprofitable. Expansion is relatively easy and available. So those are the 2 facts to keep in mind. That is not because the businesses are totally hopeless. Now, how do we square these facts? Well, I'm going to show you one figure. So this figure is a way to square these facts. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with how economists use figures, but I want to still do this exercise because it's sort of useful too. So think of it as what's on the horizontal axis is capital invested. What's on the vertical axis is revenue. And what the figures is doing is it's just saying something very obvious, which is saying that, there is a good technology out there. That's the technology marked by kind of the R. And then there is a very inferior technology out there, which is marked by P. Poor, P is the poor technology, R is the rich technology. Okay, so those are the two technologies out there. P dominates as long as you invest very little, because R requires a substantial investment. That's all that figure says. So there's one technology which is better if you make enough investment. Now, I want to make the claim that everything depends in this story on where that cutoff is. So if that cutoff is somewhere close to you, you should save up and jump to the good technology. But if that's not true, then so that the good technology is just out of your reach, nobody's going to give you need $50,000 to get there, then in some sense it's hopeless for you, so you're not going to try to get there. Then you're stuck on the P technology. The P technology is quite steep around 0. So if you go invest a little bit, you get a lot more money. But a lot more money meaning you go from $2 to $3. You still your life doesn't change. So for most of these people, I think that's the right way to think about it. Is that they can easily increase their income, but their life won't change. They're going to be very poor people with a somewhat different mix of, they could put a little more effort into it. Some people do. Some of the poor people do put more effort into it than others. Some people save more. They cut back on their tea. They put some money into it. But nothing really big is going to change. I think that's the way I want to think about it. Is that, you have an option. You can work very hard and be slightly less poor, or work less hard and be slightly poorer. You can cut back on your tea and have few more dollars worth of return. But these are all in the small numbers. That's the problem. That essentially you can change your life, but only a little. The big changes are not available. And given that the big changes are not available, people dream of other things. Let's get a government job, which will really change my life. This won't change my life. And I think that's the right framing for why people are not. The business is not because there's no opportunity in business. They could increase their incomes. They just couldn't increase their income by a lot. They could be a little bit richer, and then they'll stop. There's nice evidence of this. There's one I mentioned this study where people were given $100. Actually, I didn't mention the amount, but they were given $100 kind of as a lottery. And then what happened to these business owners? Well, they expanded the business, and their increased income went up by about $60. So quite a big increase. Some of those people were randomly given twice that much. I think not 100. They were given $250 and $500. I get the numbers wrong. So some people got $250 and they got 60% of that back. Others were given $500. The second $250, what did they do with it? Expand the business more? No. They expanded the business a little bit, then said, fine, that's enough. And they spend the next $250 on improving the house. So you see that people have internalized the idea that they really don't want to go very far with this business. It's going to be, even if I can expand it a little bit, it's not going to really change my life. So when I have a scope for a limited improvement, but then this curve, as I've drawn it, it flattens out very fast. And so your scope for going very much further is very limited. That's sort of the basic idea I want you to take away from this. So why are they in business? Because there's nothing else to do. And this is sort of self-confirming. If nobody sets up a business, then there are no jobs. Remember, I told you that nobody employs anybody. People set up businesses, but they employ no one. Since I don't employ anyone, I have a business but I don't employ anyone, nobody else can get a job. So it's self-confirming. Nobody employs anyone. Therefore, everybody has to find a living. So basically, you get this equilibrium where everybody has a tiny business, nobody is big enough to employ anyone, and therefore everybody is self-employed. I think flexibility is important, and I sometimes worry that microcredit has encouraged this idea that, you know, women should be starting businesses. I don't know how much is that their desire and how much of that is their husband's desire. Maybe husbands like the idea that their women will work harder because they are, after all, they're idle. They're not working, except that they're, of course, doing everything. But so I don't know how much. Now, that being said, does not mean that financial inclusion is not important. I think one thing we have sort of this narrative, I think, distracts us from a very core fact. Because the reason why finance is important to me as me, is not because I am investing in a business. I will not, and I think it would be a disaster if I did. It's because if I wanted to buy a house, I wanted a loan. It's turning my desires for big expenses out of my small spending. I can't spend a lot today. I couldn't spend $1 million to buy a house. But I would like $1 million house. How would I do it? I will say that, look, I'll take a loan. I'll pay 1/20th of it every year, $50,000 every year, and that way I'll pay it back. That same dream the poor have as well. And I think that's what we're seeing. It's showing that they have a desire for durables. Loans, financial intermediation, first thing what it does is it gives you access to that desire. It tells you, and they're willing to pay cost for it. They cut back on their tea to pay for their house. They pay for their TV. Whatever it is, they're willing to cut back on small expenses to achieve those desires. They're not passive. They're perfect. This is important for them. Buying a television is important for them. Buying a DVD is important for them. Buying maybe a cycle or a motorcycle is very important for them. They're looking forward to it. They're willing to put effort into it. Why aren't they getting there? Because it's very difficult to save at home. So I think providing people the opportunity to borrow so that, like me, I want to buy a house. I don't want to wait 20 years and accumulate money and then buy the house. Get people to, I think the standard reasons for financial intermediation for most middle-class people is not starting a business but enjoying life. That same applies to the poor. So the first fact is we should not forget that. That's like totally, I mean, we get distracted by this conversation about entrepreneurship. Second thing is, if you want to promote entrepreneurship, I think two things we kind of are wondering about. One is how much of it is because the microcredit loans have a specific structure, which is you have to start repaying very soon. They're very structured, no flexibility. Every week you have to repay, or every month you have to repay. Maybe if there was more flexibility, people would try more things. Because after all, if I have to start repaying the loan in a week, I better generate some returns fast. And that might limit, and there's some experimental evidence suggesting that indeed if you allow people more flexibility, they might do different things. Bigger and more selective lending. That's the other potential idea. Maybe some of these people who, if you offered most of them a $50,000 loan, well, they probably won't be able to make good use of them. But is there 5% of them who could? Probably. How do we find the 5%? I don't know. But at least that's a challenge. I mean, that's a really important challenge. Savings and insurance are clearly equally important. What also this conversation about durables says is that savings and insurance, you know, savings is probably very important for these people because they are part of what they are missing is the ability to plan their lives. So if they wanted, if they could accumulate savings in a bank account safely and without spending it, maybe they won't need a loan. Maybe they would be able to save up to buy their TV rather than and maybe they would be able to run their businesses better because their cash runs out often. Insurance has the same function, which is protect them from things that might go wrong. So all of those are other forms of financial intermediation. I think there's some evidence now that those might be at least as important as credit as a way to get people, businesses running. And I think most generally, I think this adventure through microcredit, I think, as I said, I am a big fan of financial intermediation. I think it serves very important purposes for the poor, just as it does in my life. But I think this adventure that we went through on entrepreneurship, I think this was there was facts that were staring at us in our face. We could have seen a long time ago, rather than, I think, building this entire narrative about entrepreneurship, how that's going to change all lives of billions of poor people. I think we could have discounted that a bit ahead of time, and maybe would have had a different set of evolutions which have been more useful if we had sort of not ignored the facts that was kind of staring at us in the face. But I think we've learned quite a lot, and I think we are poised for, I think, exciting new innovations in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Banerjee. We have time for, say, 3-4 questions from the floor.
I would like to know why you chose the entrepreneurship subject for your conference here. Is it because it is more related to how poor economics works in Latin American countries?
Entrepreneurship is certainly it's the most exciting narrative about poverty that emerged in the last 20 years. I think it was the one new narrative, that maybe it's the case that once we release these people's talents, they will just pull themselves up by their bootstrings, that poverty will go away, poor will make poverty history, as Muhammad Yunus would say. And so I think that's a narrative that's, I think, been very attractive in many places, including Latin America.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I was wondering, in your opinion, in how many years would you think Eco Department will implement or adopt the RCTs as formal part or core courses? And on the other hand, if you foreseen that public government related to service delivery will adopt teams with professional, with RCT assets, to run on the public service provision.
I won't answer the first question, because I have no idea of what the process of regulation is in Peru. At MIT, you get to learn a fair amount about randomized controlled trials, as you might imagine. On the other one, I feel very excited about a lot of stuff I know about Peru, where I think there is a real interest and engagement with evidence now. So I feel optimistic that there will soon be more and more engagement with evidence. I think it's not a given, but I think there is an awareness of how many things that look obvious that don't work. That's sort of what I was trying to, in a sense, illustrate, is that, if you look at the data, it speaks to you. Just if you don't, you can make up your fantasy about many things. I think that awareness is spreading fast.
You have spoken about a point where investing more into people, giving them larger loans isn't efficient, because they are going to spend the money in other things that aren't capital itself. Have you think about a way to incentive people to invest more into capital instead of luxuries or other goods?
I don't know, even I would think that. I've not said, I don't think, I was careful, I think, not to say that. I think I didn't say that. I don't believe that. I think for many people, it's very efficient for them to buy a television. I think it's just as efficient for me to have a house. I think it's a desire. I'm willing to work for it. I'm willing to, save money for it. Why is it not efficient? I think in society, it's not obvious to me that everybody should be running a business, or that most people are even gifted in running a business. I certainly could not run a business. So I don't know why I would expect other people to all be running businesses. So I don't think you want to incentivize everybody. I think the question is more, my sense is that the big question is more selection. That 1 out of 50 or 100 poor people is an extremely gifted entrepreneur, as gifted as anyone. How do you find that person? That to me is the big challenge. Is that there are people, it's not so much I think, those people don't like incentives. They work like mad, but they may still never make it because the world conspires against them.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have just one final question. In 2003, Muhammad Yunus said that we don't have to teach the poor how to survive. They already know how to survive. What we have to do is to teach them to just give them the opportunities to develop. Is this evidence enough to challenge that statement? Thank you.
I guess so. I mean, I think that I don't believe that. I do believe that there is a very important role for the old-fashioned ideas of public policy, of redistribution, of human capital, of creating, helping people have lives that are, rational and bearable. I think all of those things, I think public policy has an extremely important role to play. I think this is walking away from the standard domains of public policy, and I see no evidence for that.
I have a question. Can we apply the same logic of conditional cash transfers to these loans, these microcredit loans, in the way that people, at least here in Peru, there is evidence that people use these transfers not only to give better food to their families, not only to give better education, only they use it also to buy consumption goods,
Yeah, so what's wrong with that? I'm in favor of redistribution. It's hard for me to understand why I should eat whatever I want to eat, but poor people have to eat like only the most boring food. I mean, I think this is I don't understand why we shouldn't think redistribution is a good social goal by itself. It's very hard for me to understand that thinking. So I'll
Thanks a lot, Professor Banerjee. We should give him a big round of applause for a wonderful talk. And as planned, he will stay for a few minutes to be able to sign some copies of his wonderful Spanish version of the book. Thank you. And the rest of guys who are participating in the Financial Innovations Conference, it's in the next building, in the new building in the auditorium. So you should take some time to walk to the older building. Thank you very much.